Okay, marine ecosystems and food webs. Marine ecosystems are based on producers commonly photosynthesizing algae and bacteria, which form the base of food webs for aquatic animals. Remember that aquatic means like water, relates to water. The four major groups of these phytoplanktonic organisms are diatoms, coccolithophorids, dinoflagellates, and bacteria. These primary producers are called autotrophs, meaning self-feeders, because they manufacture the food they need from the physical and chemical environment through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Organisms that feed on autotrophs are called consumers or heterotrophs, and that means other feeders. Heterotrophs may be herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. Lastly, decomposers break down the remains of plants and animals and recycle those remains back to inorganic nutrients. Okay? We'll talk about a food chain in just a second. Okay, so first of all, because I do want to make sure that you're actually listening and following along, I want you to draw an arrow over here out to the side, and here's what I want you to write down. I want you to remind yourself that producers are phytoplankton in a marine ecosystem. So you've already got the fact that it says marine ecosystems. It's highlighted. So by your arrow, just put producers are phytoplankton. Okay? How do you spell phytoplankton, Miss Goff? Well, there it is, except it's got an IC on it. Okay? So phytoplankton. Also, go back up to where it says terrestrial ecosystems at the top and draw an arrow up there and remind yourself that producers in a terrestrial ecosystem are plants. So by terrestrial ecosystem, you're going to write producers are plants. And by marine ecosystem, you're going to put producers are phytoplankton. Okay? All right. But producers in general are autotrophs, meaning they are self-feeders. They make their own food. Okay? In a terrestrial ecosystem, your producers are plants. In a marine ecosystem, your producers are phytoplankton. And phytoplankton is a big word for a lot of different categories of things. Okay? There's many varieties of phytoplankton. All right, organisms that feed on autotrophs are called consumers or heterotrophs. And heterotroph means that they're feeding on something else. They don't feed themselves. Heterotrophs may be herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. Okay, and then lastly, we have decomposers, which break down the remains of plants and animals and recycle those remains back to inorganic nutrients. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Come over here where you've got a little bit of room and remind yourself that consumers, the word consumers, is also known or are also known as heterotrophs. Okay? And that you have three types of heterotrophs that we mentioned, okay? Number one, herbivores. And you're going to write eat producers, like plants and phytoplankton. Okay. Type of heterotroph number two, carnivores. And you're going to write eat meat or eat animals. And then number three, omnivores. Eat both plants and animals. Okay, so can't remember where I was. But anyway, your consumers are also known as your heterotrophs. Remember, I asked you to write that herbivores eat producers. If it is a terrestrial ecosystem, those producers are plants. If it's a marine ecosystem, then those producers are phytoplankton. So eat producers. And you can say plants and phytoplankton. Carnivores eat meat or eat animals. Omnivores eat both plants and animals, okay? Or eat both producers and animals, or whatever you want to say. And then last but not least, it doesn't really fall into the consumer category, but it definitely doesn't fit in the producer category either, and that is decomposers. Okay? Decomposers break down the remains of plants and animals. That's their job. And instead of writing decomposers out again, just know that that's another type. Some people, I guess, call them or consider them heterotrophs because they don't feed themselves. So, maybe that's your fourth type. Okay? All right. A food chain is a sequence of feeding relationships among organisms that provide pathways along which energy and mass move within an ecosystem. So, for instance, feeding relationships among organisms such as producers, consumers, and decomposers. And a food chain allows you to see the pathway that energy and mass follow. In a marine food chain, phytoplankton is eaten by a herbivore, which in turn is eaten by a carnivore, which is then eaten by another carnivore, so on and so forth. Eventually, decomposers recycle the remains back to primary production at the base of the food chain in the form of inorganic nutrients. Basically, what they're saying is they're decomposers, or their job is to break stuff down into simple substances so that it can be reused. Okay, what I want you to do is you need to highlight this sentence right here. A food chain is a sequence of feeding relationships among organisms, like producers, consumers, and decomposers, that provides pathways along which energy and mass move within an ecosystem. Okay, if you'll do that for me now. Okay, so that's what page 1 should look like. Join me on page 2 for the next screencast. And just remember, your copy looks a little bit different than mine because I shrunk yours down a little bit so that you had some room in the margin to make the notes and the additions that I've asked of you. Okay?